a public review period when we finished that draft report, and we received a number of concerns at the public meeting that we weren't able to address because we were pretty much bumping up to the limit of that $100,000, which was totally federal. And so the project's been on hold until the town contacted us about restarting it. And in March 26, 2024, the Corps and the town executed an agreement for the feasibility study. And we obtained the funding. So we had to put in place, after we signed the agreement, we have to obtain the federal and local funds. And so we did that in May of 2024. Since that time, I've been waiting to schedule the work of the coastal hydraulic engineer to perform the first assessment of kind of the critical factors that I think are essential to us making a decision about how to move forward. And so we just got that done in August and September, so this month, basically. So just to step back, I don't have a lot of slides, but just for a little bit of context, just showing the conditions before we built Long Point Dike and the conditions shortly after 1938, where you can still see that there was a salt marsh behind the dike, and can see the configuration of the harbor without the dike in place. So this just shows the features of the federal navigation project. So for this project for us, we're modifying the federal navigation project, which consists of the federal navigation channel, the Provincetown Harbor Breakwater, and then Long Point Dike. And so to us, the project modification is to modify our Long Point Dike. This shows a proposed breach location. This is from our presentation that we had put together back when we released the draft report. And there's nothing set in stone, pardon the pun, about the location of the proposed breach. Just to refresh, I guess mostly my memory about what the dike looks like. This is a view looking to the north from about the center of the dike, looking to the south, and then showing there's a couple of existing low areas on the dike where we get some flow over it during high tides. And this will be a factor in some of the slides that I have a little bit later on. And so to refresh your memory about what the opening was going to look like, as I said earlier, it's 10 feet width at the bottom, 40 feet at the top. And so that width was really driven by the size of the blocks that make up the dike. So we were just trying to put in the minimum opening that we could to establish that connectivity for fish and large invertebrates to move back and forth on either side of the dike. And our estimated construction cost back in 2016 was about $1.3 million. So as I said, we released the draft report, and we got a number of comments, many of them in a public meeting like this, as well as written comments from the Conservation Commission and others. And I'm just going to summarize them here to kind of refresh our memory about that. The Providence, I'm sorry, I'm from Providence and it keeps coming out that way. So the Provincetown Conservation Commission expressed concerns about the benefits being uncertain. I think that's something we can address through the report and further analysis. They expressed concern about the impact of flooding and flood storm damage. The distribution of sand, if we were to create the opening, so that would be the effects of increased current speeds on sand movement and distribution. And related to that would be the impacts on the nearby shellfish grants and recreational fishing. And they also expressed concerns about predator-prey dynamics. particularly in the town meeting and in written comments, we also got comments about very strong currents through the opening and the risk to swimming and kayaking. And some people had experience from when there had been breaches in the dike in the past. There was also concern for the Barrier Beach to the west of the dike. So just for us to be able to picture things, this is from the town website, and it shows the aquaculture leases and their proximity to the dike. So I mentioned that one of the first things we wanted to do, because it really addresses a number of the problems that are, or the concerns that have come up. So if we were to find that different size openings would reduce the velocities, it was my hope that putting multiple openings in the dike would reduce the velocities through the dike to a reasonable level. And we've done a little bit of research and come up with a current speed of 2.5 feet per second as being acceptable for swimmers. And so that's kind of our target speed. And so our first step here was to, before we spend a lot of money, just do a little quick analysis to get a sense of whether that sort of approach of increasing the number of openings would enable us to reduce the velocity. So we use the HECRAS model. It's not really built, it's not a coastal model, but we think it was a good way to get that preliminary estimate. So the preliminary model results for the current conditions, looking at that low spot that you saw in the picture, the peak velocity over that under existing conditions about 6 to 7 feet per second, which is pretty high. And then our hydraulic engineer ran the model for the originally proposed conditions of one opening. And the model results showed that the peak velocity through the opening was about 6.2 feet per second. And it reduces to about 2.5 feet per second, so that a safe speed about 100 to 125 feet from the opening. And with that, looking at that opening plus that existing low area, there was no change to the velocities under that at that low spot on the dike. So then I asked the hydraulic engineer to run the model with 3 openings. So I said earlier, the cost for one opening is about 1.3 million. Guessing that in today's dollars, that's probably 2 million. And I'm imagining that would probably be the upper limit of what the town and the federal government would want to spend on this project. So about $6 million for 3 openings. So just as an example to run in the model. So the hydraulic engineer added additional openings to the model to the north and south of that initial opening that you just saw. And the flow through all the openings was still in the 6 to 6.2 feet per second range. And again, they returned to safe velocities, or 2.5 feet per second, about 100 to 125 feet from the footprint of the dike. And again, no impact to the low spot elevations. So what's that's saying is, with this simple model applied in an unusual situation for the model, it doesn't look like providing additional openings significantly affects the velocity of flow through the dike. So that, in one way, that's good, because that means we don't have to pay more for additional openings, but that means that we still have the concerns that we need to address with respect to current speed. And so, and this is one of my last slides. So the way for us to deal with that, and you know, it's open to discussion here, would be to run a more sophisticated and appropriate model for the situation to get a better estimate of what the current speeds through the opening will actually be. And one of the things that model didn't handle very well was the permeability of the dike itself. And that's why, you know, the dike is so permeable, all the water comes in, comes out. That was one of the reasons we didn't put as much emphasis on that when we were trying to wrap up this study with that initial $100,000 of federal money. Related to that would be sediment dynamics and the results of the more sophisticated model. So we talked about the current velocities and when they reach a safe or 2.5 feet per second. This would give us a better indication of the area affected by the increased velocities by creating an opening. And so we're hoping, and we would obviously discuss this with all of you stakeholders and participants, what the appropriate approach would be. But sediment dynamics, sediment modeling would be very expensive, and that's not something we've currently budgeted for. That's multiples of hundreds of thousands of dollars to answer that question. So we would also do, so we released a draft report. So what we do, since we've had so much time and so many comments that we need to address, is just do some additional analysis to address all the concerns and hopefully work with everybody who's interested as we do that. Issue a second draft report for public and agency review. So that would be another opportunity for you all to provide your input. And then, so we take those comments and then issue a final report with a recommendation on whether to move forward or not. And then if there's agreement, then we would move into the design and construction phase, which is implementation. And that was that's the last of my slides. Hopefully you were able to hear that whole time.
I think so. Yeah, I think that yeah, your volume definitely improved. For going forward, let me see. I want to get the spotlight off of you. I think I can see the participants here. So what going forward, I think what we'd like to do, I apologize, we don't have a microphone, so I might have to repeat your question for Larry to hear you. But I think at this time, what we'll do is take comments from folks in the room. And for the folks who are online, you can either use the raise hand function on Teams, or if you have dialed in, you may unmute yourself by pressing *6 and stating your name when we call for public comment from those who are joining online. So I think I'll start with folks in the room who might have questions or comments. Oh, also, we are recording this just for purposes of going back to hear folks' comments and questions to be able to process them at a later time. So, Mr. O'Malley, Dr. O'Malley.
Larry, Brian O'Malley. The findings of no change in flow velocity with multiple openings is counterintuitive. Was this done with a similar total cross-sectional area? In other words, were all three openings smaller than the original one? Or are there three of the same size openings where I have real trouble imagining it doesn't affect that? Can you explain?
Yes, there were three of the same size opening. And yeah, so that was the idea to obviously, if we make three of the same size opening for something we've already designed, and that makes sense from the construction standpoint, that would make the most sense from that perspective. I was surprised too. And it could be that that's because of the limits of this model. But the hydraulic engineer feels like it's probably a pretty good estimate, but to know for sure, we'd need to use a model that's actually built for this particular situation.
Thank you.
Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for this. I hear a lot of effect on the breakwater. I'm not hearing anything about the effect on the marsh itself, the purported benefits, the increase of flushing. Are there any models or any predictions for the overall effect, which is after all why we're doing this?
Yeah, as I said, we're for the core from the core standpoint, what we're looking at is fish passage and the benefit to the marsh. But that would be to introduce predators that could feed on things like the purple marsh crab to hopefully keep that a little bit better under control. We can look at the difference in flushing, and I mean, we've done, when we started doing salt marsh restoration back 20, 30 years ago, whenever that was, most of our projects were restoring tidal flow to a marsh. My sense is that that's not the driver of the problems in this marsh, but we can certainly look at the effects of the changes in hydrology. The other thing is, it's such a small opening, such a small ability to affect the tide range that I don't think that, well, I think there won't be that much of an effect to that.
I'm sorry, did you say that hydrology is not the driving force for the problems in the marsh? Is that what you said?
I'm saying that we would probably not have much change to the hydrology. And the area, the dieback and all the bare areas in the marsh appear to be due to the marsh crabs. But happy to talk to anybody who knows more about the particulars of this marsh. You know, it's been there for a long time with the dike in place. And so I think the hydrology is okay, but we can discuss that more if we want.
I think one thing I'd want to add, town staff has had a number of discussions with biologists with the Cape Cod National Seashore. And from what my understanding is that throughout Cape Cod Bay, they're seeing impacts in similar salt marshes from the purple marsh crab in marshes that are not impounded by a breakwater or dike the way that the West End marsh is. So it is possible that although opening the dike might allow for larger fish to be able to enter the marsh to prey on the purple marsh crab, it might not be sufficient to control the population. Why don't we go with Michaela? I think I saw you next.
Largely about their aquaculture grants, but also about swimming and strandings. You know, one, obviously the opening up to large fish will also allow large sharks. But is there any concern about strandings that if large fish are going,
sharing.
if large fish are going in and then the tide gets quite low, are you worried about an increase in strandings? We have so many dolphins in the harbor now. Like, I mean, the other day there was about 120 dolphins out there. So if they're going in and not necessarily able to get back out with the tide, is that a concern?
Yeah, I'm not concerned with that. There are lots of estuaries all around the coast that are dry during low tide, and the fish and other organisms that get in there find a way to get out. And if you're a fisherman, you know that you want to be at the beginning of that tide, starting to come out to catch all the fish that start panicking and say, I got to get out of here.
Wellfleet just had one of the largest strandings in, I think, in history.
Yeah, and we can certainly discuss that with the National Marine Fisheries Service too. That's a reasonable concern. From my perspective, I don't think it'll be an issue, but I'm happy to talk with people that are marine mammal experts about that.
Want to go with William?
Yeah, and maybe this is for you, you know, has the National Seashore or the Army Corps of Engineers done a study between the initial 2014 proposal and now on how much how prevalent the purple marsh crab has become? Because since then, we've had a breach at like Boy Beach,
Yeah.
right, in one of those storms. I'm wondering, is that on high tide, there's more water coming into that area? But I'm just curious, like, we're designing solutions, but what's like, is the problem like this? Like, is there a huge spike now? It's out of control and we need to do something? Or is it kind of level off? I mean, I do see a difference when I walk there. I see more mud flats than seagrass.
Yeah.
But but that's just by my eyesight. I don't know if this study's been done. And if there is a way to study.
They're underway. Steve Smith with the National Park Service is actually currently looking at, well, that's Jeff. Steve with the I actually met up with him before this portion of the study had started to kind of discuss what he saw and what might be an option. And in his opinion, the addition of sediment would probably be the greatest benefit that we would see from something like this. The addition of sediment in many cases has been shown to decrease the prevalence of purple marsh crab. So if a marsh is properly getting that sediment input and it's able to add its elevation as we see sea level change, then generally the purple marsh crabs are more controlled. Whereas in this marsh, we don't get any increase in elevation, and that is starting to become.
Do you want to go ahead?
My name's Chase. I own Coyote Kayak, so I'm on the salt marsh every single day. And I could say that the seagrass is receding, like from the last season to this season. It feels like a drastic difference. Yeah, it's receded probably. I mean, there are any studies on how much it's receded? Because probably like 200% worse.
We have
than
salt marsh
last year.
trackers on our data portals that we recently published. So if anybody wants to see kind of the visuals of how much salt marsh we have lost in recent years, we have those, and I'm happy to send it out to anybody who wants to see.
But is it exponentially? Because obviously we've had this for 110 years. So, but we have a huge increase in the purple marsh crabs. So it's not necessarily correlated directly to the breakwater, but are we sure that the fish going in is going to?
Not necessarily. It's probably going to be a combination of things that would actually impact.
I'm
the
just
health.
wondering if that we're trying to solve one problem and creating many others.
And that's kind of what we're trying to
And
do.
then I guess on that note, if it is the purple marsh crab that is the biggest concern, is there any other solutions that have been entertained for the purple marsh crabs?
I know as Melissa mentioned, the seashore is looking into adding sediment studies that would actually dump sand on top of the marsh. The grass is resilient enough to grow through it, and that would smother the purple marsh crab populations. But Melissa and I recently had a site visit out at Nantucket where we learned, we didn't go specifically for this reason, but we learned that there are some innovative trapping techniques that they're using in the salt marshes in Nantucket for purple marsh crabs. So that's something we'd like
There's
to
certain types of
explore.
netting that prevent them from burrowing, and that tends to help a lot with the peat retention.
Basically, pull
Calling the population.
Yeah, there needs
Right.
to be some sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point of the
it. Maybe
predators.
it's much cheaper.
Yeah, yeah.
option.
Alex, you want to go ahead?
This thing that I've noticed. You know the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Think about what my colleague just said about any sediment. Get sediment. That amount of water in there, you get more sediment to it.
lights up, right? You raise that water up in the back on that marsh, the first thing you're gonna have is you're gonna have to pay, you're gonna have the flooding of that Provincetown land roads. Right? And you're gonna have to deal with the Provincetown Inn, because nobody's ever talked to the abutters of the place. Then this fellow brought up about Boyd Beach, they're not even gonna be able to walk out back over there. It might end up, Long Point might end up becoming an island, that over there. Thank God that that thing is there. If anything, the Army Corps of Engineers should finish a project they started and fix the breakwater the way it was supposed to be. Those rocks are going down because it's getting undermined by the pressure of the water going out. It's called the Venturi effect. I might be dumb, but I'm not stupid. I've been a fisherman all my freaking life. I'm 70 years old. I'm retired from out on the big boats. I had a grant out there for 35 years, 36 years. I've seen it. I understand what it is. And the thing is, you make an opening in that thing, you're not going to be able to control it. It's going to do sand dunes on either side. It's going to be a channel that's going to get scoured out in there. That's only one opening. And you just said before, opening 3 spots over there makes no effect. Now you're going to have 3 channels going back over there. Right? You're going to have sediment on both sides. Never mind the commercial aspect of it. We'll leave that alone because there's not that many people there. You have the recreational thing on either side. Back in the old days, I used to help Reggie Enos plant clams back over there in the old shellfish garden back in the 90s. Dr. O'Malley remembers him, and so does Dennis Minsky. Remember him. I used to help him plant out there. Every year we did it. It was put in tape. Things were taken off a little bit, which is good. It's all positive. Why screw with nature? Things change. But the thing is, we had that breach that this fellow was talking about before out by the beach that's out over there. If it wasn't for that breakwater, it would have come right in. Delhaven wouldn't be here right now. Nothing would be there out on that shore. And it's kind of ironic today, you had a coastal resiliency meeting. You're talking about coastal resiliency. All these places are talking about building breakwaters and doing whatever, and we're talking about punching holes in them. I mean, this is bass backwards. Sorry. If anything, you guys should be out there putting more rocks out over there, fixing that doggone thing. That would be a wonderful start out over there, to be honest with you. And the other thing too, you're talking about putting a bridge across over there. Who's going to maintain that bridge once you do it? Because the cormorants and the seals are going to be on top of that, cracking all over the place. And you're going to have more accidents out over there. And of course, you're going to get the people with boats that are doing, and there's plenty of them. And they're going to wind up back over there. You're going to get, and we have had strandings back over there before. I'm afraid that that's going to increase. And then with the thing that Michaela was saying something about the dolphins being in there, they're going to go back in there because if the little fish go back there, they're going to go back there for food. And the fellow with the kayaks should know too. Back over there, there's so many little estuaries. You can get yourself lost back over there. You don't know where the heck you're going. So I'd be very careful with this thing. I'm sorry. I see a lot of bad on this thing here. I'd love for you guys to fix it. Fix the breakwater. Get it back smooth again or do something. But there's a reason why those rocks are going down. I only did 3.5 years of college. I missed the 4th semester there when they talked about the rest of the thing. That's why I can't speak totally on it. But the thing is, I know what the hell I'm talking about, and I'll go up against any one of you guys. You bring any of your PhDs in again, I did that in 2017, I'll do it again.
I think another concern, and I
Thank you.
sort of briefly touched on it, but we changed the ecosystem by allowing seal population. And we have, I mean, when I was a kid, there was like a rumor that fishermen offshore right now, you see them every day. I've seen 6 predations this summer. And if you open that, that's one of the last places that people really, and I'm not saying that people should environment, but already changed the environment. And I'm worried that we're a modern town where people can't swim anymore. You can't swim on the backside. You can't swim without a part of the ball. I mean, it's insane how many sharks. So now we're going to open that up to sharks.
Go ahead, Peter.
So By opening up the breakwater, does that really affect the height of the water height or depth of water? Will it all drain out still? And it won't get any higher because the water permeates through the breakwater now. But I assume, will it drain out more or as it's the same?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, it drains completely under the existing conditions, so it'll continue to do that. It's really not a hydraulic project, so it's not going to affect the high water levels very much, and not going to affect the low water levels very much. It's just about creating an opening to provide access. We can do a more detailed look at the effects on hydrology to address your question and an earlier question, provided that the National Park Service has information about the elevation of the marsh back there, which I'm guessing they may. But we can take a look at that. And then on storms, the whole dike is overtopped, right? So the water is just moving over that so that it has less effect at a very high water level, I guess I'm saying.
Let me go with Mark and then Paul.
Thank you. There are concerns, I think, legitimate concerns about velocities and sediment. But generally, this dike is an impairment to the ecological community. What the thinking was, it altered the restoring those natural conditions. Generally going to be helpful. As the questions about water level, there's a full tidal range behind it. That won't change. That's already one of the best marshes. Tidal flush. But the question I wanted to put, maybe Larry knows about this, but there were studies after the 1978 breakthrough at Wood End that suggested that the dike was really the cause of those beach formations. That was because of the hydraulic head, I guess, of the amount of trapped water. There's a lot of water trapped behind that dike that can't flow out. Storm conditions going to have a high velocity, so power channel, which normally wouldn't happen if tide was allowed to flow freely. So several studies and people like Graham Geis have been of the opinion that the dike itself is the cause of the instability of the land barrier. I don't know. Is that something you're familiar with at all, Larry?
Yeah, I didn't get 100% of that, but I think I got most of it. And yes, the studies by the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, what we relied upon in the draft report, in saying that we didn't expect any effects to the beach on the other side of the dike. And right, it's again, it's not changing the hydraulics significantly except for where the water is flowing through the dike. So high water levels, the
Sure.
speed of the whole area emptying of water, because the opening would be so small, doesn't have a huge effect on that. And again, those things we would look at if we did more sophisticated modeling.
Paul, before we take your question, Larry, would you mind just pressing the stop sharing button on your computer?
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, don't leave just yet. I think we still need you.
Did I stop sharing?
Yes. That's great. Thank you. Paul and then Clivey.
Can you hear me, Larry?
Yes, I think so.
You mentioned sediment dynamics being hundreds of thousands of dollars to study, and I just wanted to know when in the sequence that would happen. Because I think a lot of the questions that raised to us are about how the sediment dynamics would change with the scouring or potential scouring, and I just want to know when that would be slotted into the administrative process to actually explore.
Yes, so I like to do things in steps so that we make sure we're not spending money we don't need to. And that's why we did that initial assessment to kind of give us a sense of the likelihood that more openings would change the current speeds. And so I would do the more sophisticated hydraulic modeling about this current speeds through the opening and see what that tells us. And if that confirms that the velocities only change within that 125-foot area relative to the dike, that would be something that we want to discuss with you all, because the leases are 800 to 1,000 feet from the dike. And so if the current speeds, say, were off by double, are within 300 feet of the dike, it's not very likely there's going to be a large effect to the areas, 800 and 1,000 feet away. And we'd be able to have a better discussion about that with better or more appropriate modeling.
I would just,
The scouring analysis, I mean, when we talk about currents, we're talking about it like middle tide and low tide. Where
When the velocity is the highest, are you asking? It looks like the kind of the mid tide.
I just
Because
want to
it
echo.
has to have some time for the velocity. I mean, for the elevation outside the dike to drop, and then when it's slowed down inside the dike, that's when the head differential is the most significant.
I just want to reiterate a point that Alex Brown made, which is that, we're not concerned only with the effects of the commercial aquaculture leases, but also the recreational shellfishing that occurs right along the dike itself. So just wanted to reiterate that. Why don't we go with Calliope? And then I just want to, after Calliope speaks, I think I want to just turn to the folks who are here online, and then we'll come back to the folks in the room. Sure.
Top of that hierarchy, shorebird. And we have like the biggest rookery in the Northeast with other breakwater. And I see plenty of platforms occurring. Is there another way that this is looked at to any more shorebirds to the other side of the marsh, in addition to maybe some other efforts like a, more petite breakwater? Just wondering if we're also thinking about the recreational shellfish. One of the reasons why the marsh crab seems to flourish is the decimation of recreational shellfish flats. I'm wondering if it's like a multi-pronged mitigation and how the town is the number one predator that we have in abundance. That's something that we can't like leverage and offer.
That's a good point. I don't think I have an answer. I don't
I
know.
have never heard of a way that you can entice more shorebirds to an area. It would be great if there was. That would be fantastic. But that's a fascinating idea. It really is.
Also important to note that these marsh crabs are nocturnal.
Right.
They are.
I think
That's important, yeah.
It's a huge.
Yeah.
in the conversation.
Right. That's a good point. Thank you. I think at this point, again, we'll come back to the folks in the room, but I just want to acknowledge some folks online. I think I saw Michelle S. first. If you want to go ahead and unmute and state your name.
Hello, Michelle Stephanie here. I just wanted to clarify for everybody that the degradation of the marsh grass is of paramount concern to the entire community because it's a huge sink of for water during flood times. This marsh was in great condition comparative to today, if you look back 10 or 15 years. And I think people really need to focus on how vital that habitat is to the community and the fishery and everything around. I spend a lot of time in that water at high tide, and I also want everybody to be aware that there's significant current coming through the rocks at all times, such that there's certain areas where you're swimming that you might not be able to swim directly back to the rocks in the current existing condition. So concerns over a stronger flow of water due to an opening might be a little overwrought. If you haven't experienced that strong current, you might not realize that that's sort of the nature that already exists there.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Carrie Morning.
Hi, I'm sorry that I couldn't hear everybody who shared. I have a question that I was wondering if the modeling, if you looked at culverts rather than openings, if that would make a difference, multiple culverts through the breakwater.
Yeah, I know that we talked about that, but I think they would have, we'd have more of the problems would be more severe with the culverts than the larger opening. But yeah, that's a good idea and something we talked about. I don't think we addressed it in the report though.
But you've done modeling on that issue?
No, I don't think we modeled it. No, we didn't model it, in fact. But the current speeds would be more constricted, and so they'd be even higher, and then they'd be harder to see. So that it might be more of a hazard if we were to do that. But we can do some more thinking about that and address it directly in the report and analysis.
Thank you.
If there's anyone else online, if you're joining us by Teams, you can press the raise hand icon and unmute yourself. Or if you're dialing in, you can press *6 to unmute your phone and just state your name. Okay, I'm not seeing any others. So I'll go back to the room. Is there anyone else in the room who has a question or a comment? Mr. Panagor.
Yes, Larry, David Penrock, I just wasn't clear in your response to Paul. Is there effectively a sedimentary report analysis that will be done, or only an analysis of the flow and the yardage of the impact? Because I heard you say if everything's 600, 700 away and it's only landing 300 away, it won't have much of an impact. I wasn't clear. You were saying that you were doing a sedimentary study in this analysis, or you weren't? Or is that the sedimentary analysis just deciding that it won't impact it because the distances are too far?
Yes, so we haven't done any sedimentation analysis. Again, I would do it in a stepped procedure. So the velocity is really what's going to drive the sediment movement, right? So if we know where the velocity is going to change and that's very close to the dike, then we can make some informed decisions about what we expect to have happen further away from the dike. I work for the Army Corps of Engineers. We have lots and lots of money to cost share 50% of 100,000 or 50 or $200,000. We can afford that, but I think the town would want to make a decision about whether that be worth it to them, and we would help them to do that with the input of our coastal engineers to assess how, what kind, is sediment dynamics in this kind of situation very complicated? And to make a model that accurately reflects those conditions is just an expensive thing. And most models are a little bit off. So we'd have to deal with that.
Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to go to some folks who haven't asked yet. Do you want to?
That close to the breakwater on either side.
Only
I'm
from the
wondering how
opening, from the opening, 100 to 125 feet, only from that opening that would be installed.
So just.
Just
Just
that
like the-
section,
it
yeah.
won't affect elsewhere?
Well, it would depend on if we'd have multiple openings or one opening, but in the one opening scenario, it's what the models are showing is that we'll have similar velocities regardless. And it would likely be in that same low point where we're already seeing that same velocity. So the velocities, at least according to the models, which I do just want to reiterate to everyone, does not include the permeability of the dike as it stands. It was using a different model that was not designed for our specific characteristics. So the numbers may change if we choose to go into a more specific hydrologic model. But it would really just depend on where that is. So it could be placed in an area where people don't generally shellfish recreationally. But it would really be up to that modeling. So likely the logical idea would be to place it in an area where we already see that high velocity so that it isn't a huge change to the existing conditions. If we even get to a point where we decide that this is something we want.
Mikhail?
So I'm really not for or against this because I don't feel like I'm not an expert in any of this, but it does seem to me like I agree with Michelle, they're already in the current, so I don't think that is as much of an issue. And I also agree with her that in the past 10 or 15 years, the marsh, even in the past 2 or 3 years, the marsh has eroded so much. And it seems to me like as a layperson that a huge amount of this is the purple marsh crab. And if we're going to be spending a significant amount of money, does it make sense to first start with mitigation of that and talk about implementing some of the mitigation habits that Nantucket is doing and seeing how that works before we make a potentially, because say the dike opening didn't work out, and then we have to go through, I don't know how many years of permitting to put it back, and another expense of that. So, I'm not saying that this isn't the best solution, but I'm saying, I don't think it should be the first solution. I think that maybe we, try a year or two of, culling the crabs and seeing how that, I don't know how that's gonna work, but if it's working in Nantucket, and if they're seeing results from that, is that something that we try and then go to this?
Or measure.
Yeah.
I think Bob or Dennis, I'll let you duke it out.
I think I want to just say pretty much what Michaela just said. I think if we look at the marsh instead of the breakwater, we focus on the marsh. And what is the problem with the marsh? And I heard Mark Adams, his opinion I respect, that in general, more flushing would help the marsh. But what I'm not hearing are any biologists, any ecologists who could really give us, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Smith about, what could help the marsh, including manipulating the breakwater, but other options, as Michaela mentioned. I'm not hearing anybody from the life sciences side.
Right. Heard. Go ahead, Dr. Mullen.
I want to agree completely with what Dennis Minsky just said. The rationale for this entire project is to deal with the purple marsh crab. And yet we've heard that there are estuaries all around us that don't have a dike blocking the water flow, and they're having trouble. I know it's the case in Wellfleet. I've listened to lectures on the marsh grass there. So I feel like we're possibly chasing a solution that's not a solution. It's not clear to me that we have any proof that our situation is specific and unique because of that dike. But it's happening around us.
Alex, let me get to you next. First, this one had her hand up first.
Yes. Sediment flow, sediment change study, would that possibly enlighten us at all into sediment exchange marsh and whether or not that could help with perhaps, as mentioned, that having additional sand on top of the peak potentially reduce their population. So I'm wondering if that is an avenue also that could be helpful.
I think it could be. Yeah, it's difficult because the marsh is not under the control of the town in the same way that the breakwater is not. But I think, you know, if we're going to, if there are ways that we can be supportive of the National Seashore, looking into alternative remediation with respect to the purple marsh crab, maybe that's the way the town should be looking. Yeah, multi-pronged. Yeah. Hmm. Alex, why don't you go next and then, yeah, go ahead.
Correct too. That's an invasive species. That was coming in on thousands of ships. Sometimes it's coming from Boston. Tankers, when they were offloading, they have to stop it,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
I think the marsh crab's native, the green European crab.
They are not native.
Yeah.
No, they're not. They're being stuff. You got them up in Plymouth, you got them up in Duxbury, you got them all in Situate, you got them all way up over there. And yes, they are showing up, and I would like to see, and going on with, Ali and Finsky, the fact that I'd like to see if the National Seashore would try putting some sediment out there, just to see as an experiment, one controlled area, to see if that would help and do something, do something about it. Because we're chasing after something, we're going in circles here. We're going in circles, we're getting everybody all upset about a lot of different stuff. Why don't we try something here without try something, see if it works. We try, it's called an experiment. That all.
I think one thing it's like, so if we like put sediment on or we like put netting on, like, aren't they burrow, they make interconnected.
No, you're missing what I'm saying. What I meant was if they dump sediment out
Yeah.
there, that's what I meant. I should have clarified that. Just for argument's sake, if they dump one control, they do control areas, things. They did a control area, let's say, whatever, they dumped sediment out over there, try to control area and see. If they all scattered out of there, we got something going on here. All of a sudden, they started dying off in that area, we got something going on. I'm just saying that, I'm trying to come up with a solution,
Right.
rather than complain, come up with a solution. Okay. And the other thing too is that thing about the sediment. Yeah, you said the 125 feet, but it's 125 feet all the way around. Not
Well,
just ahead,
So
it's
the,
all the way
the
around.
125 feet is only the velocities. That is the only thing that's been studied so far. We
Right.
haven't done the sediment
Yeah.
study, so we don't know what
Yes,
the
but you're
effects
gonna,
are gonna be.
you're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
take the 125
Yeah.
and you're gonna go side to side, because that's the sediment. When you pull that up and it burrows over there, you're gonna go 125 on this side and 125 on this side, and it's gonna exponentially go up. It's gonna be like a perimeter around that area. But that young lady was just talking about recreational shellfishing against the breakwater, which everybody does. So keep that in mind. It's not gonna be that one little area, it's gonna be the whole thing, because it's gonna smuggle those things over. And I know for a fact, from growing clams many years ago, you get too much dynamic sand, they die. Trust me, I killed enough of them, but, no, I'm trying not to be a complainer here. I'm trying to come up with a solution, but I like the idea of trying a control area, working with the National Seashore and doing something, because it's beneficial to them and beneficial to us. And then we can put that money, if we find out it works, we can put that money to good use, maybe fix the rate.
Why don't we hear from first from Jeff Sanders, who's the Chief Science Officer for the National Seashore. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm not Steve Smith, but he works for me, and Steve and I had a long conversation today, and I know Steve's talked to you guys a lot about work he's doing. First, I want to echo what Mark Adams said. I think that providing additional flow through the breakwater would be ecologically beneficial to the marsh, to the system in general. That does not mean it's going to solve your purple marsh crab problem. I think I'm not familiar with what they're doing on Nantucket. I know they are trapping them in, I believe, McCoy Bay. Steve and I have talked a lot about fishes. I think you have to be aware that you're going to put some sort of pit trap out there. You're going to catch a lot of things other than purple marsh crabs, and things you may not be looking to get, things you may not be looking to kill. So just a word of caution there. So there's been a lot of work done. Steve's got a lot of small scale experiments going on. He's already tested various approaches to controlling the crabs. Some very successfully. Some of them ongoing in West End Marsh, so some of them over in the gut and Wellfleet. Scaling those up. Massachusetts has very strict regulations on what you can place on salt marshes. Scaling those experiments up to a larger scale, which we're looking into right now, one, it costs a lot of money. And then two, you do have to get a significant, you have to get 404 permits from the Corps and EPA, you have to get 401s, you have to go through the town, and then you have to get a lot of, you have to go through DEP in the state to get approvals to do all these things. It's not insurmountable, but there's a lot you have to go through to do it. And I think the good news is that specifically sand on the marsh, these crabs do not like to burrow through sand. That's what Steve's found dominantly controls them. So you'll have a sand plot that has Spartina growing up through it successfully, and then you'll have a control plot next to it. Nothing. So I think I think the seashore is very interested in pursuing this further, not just in West End, but in other areas of the park as well, because there's a lot of aspects to this. Once you lose that vegetation, and these, by the way, I just want to say I'm very impressed with the knowledge of the purple marsh crab in this room. But they are nocturnal. They do act predominantly on creek banks, and when you lose the vegetation along creek banks, the force of the water, you're just going to create a lot of erosion. You lose all that peat, and all that carbon that's stored in that peat is then emitted. There's a whole number of factors that play into this, which makes this type of work really important. So that said, I think we are very interested in looking into ways that we can address this. I don't know. Again, I don't know whether the idea of opening the breakwater, which I think would be ecologically beneficial too. And if you're really looking at increasing sediment flow into the marsh, I think you would need to figure out where are the optimal points along the breakwater to put additional holes or breaks or channels to promote sediment flow. But I think we shouldn't look at this as the answer to the purple marsh crab.
Yeah, thank you. That helps a lot. And so I think it's like helpful to maybe even like story tell through like what was the marsh like before the breakwall was there? Like, was the sediment coming in? What types of fish were coming in? If the purple marsh crabs are nocturnal, then they've got high tide from 6.5 hours, 7 hours on either side to be in the marsh. So, but they're only out at night, so there's only one high tide. And like, what type of fish? Are they getting in the burrows during the day? Probably not. I think it would be helpful to kind of go through what we think opening up the Great Wall would do, what fish would come in. And to the point back here, it's like is the seabird is more of the predator from what I've seen, obviously, because we're out there during the day, like they can't, I don't know if seagulls are up at night.
Yeah.
I have maybe kind of a silly question, but what was the rationale for building the breakwater in 19? Was that to, because are we gonna, by opening it, are we going to open up a new problem that, like, that's why they spent all this money to build this in 1914? And then secondly, and again, I'm not a scientist and I don't have a background in this, but is there, if it seems like from marshes in other areas where they don't have a breakwater, and so predatory fish and shorebirds are getting in, and they're still having an alarming rise in the purple marsh crabs, is there a way of making more smaller breaks that would allow sediment flow, but not allow the predatory fish to come in and potentially get stranded, or we're creating a shark tank out there? And then that would help with the ecological part of it. And then we also work on mitigation for the purple marsh crabs. Like, is that something that we've looked at? And again, I'm not saying like we need to spend a ton more money doing this, but I think that if we're looking at it twofold, like there's the sediment issue, which maybe we could solve with smaller breaks. And then there's the purple marsh crab issue, which is not going to be solved by an opening necessarily, that maybe we can take those two separate issues and work on it in a different way.
Tim, do you want me to answer any of that?
Sure, yeah, if you have a response, please. Yeah.
Sure. Well, the dike is there to protect the harbor. And you know, it's a navigation project, and that was built to protect navigation in the harbor. I was wondering if I could also share Google Earth for a second to put some perspective on that 100 feet and the condition of the marsh.
David, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, David Flattery. I'm not sure if I'm for or against this project, but we all know how sand moves around the Cape, erosion, road welfare. People are having to move, etc. The sand, folks have said that it ends up coming around and possibly down towards the Snail Road area. We've seen that sand probably rise where I have, maybe 3 feet or so. So I think, and what I'm sort of hearing is people are afraid to spend the money. It's my opinion that study for sediment is an absolute. I once say if there becomes more erosion than what we think is going to happen, there's no turning back on big erosion and that tidal flat.
And
Okay, Carrie, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
I just want to say that the work that Stephen Smith has done and his team is amazing. You know, they have found a way to prevent the crabs, the purple crab, from doing the damage that they do, and also raising the substrate, which is so important with sea level rise. So, you know, maybe I have a question for his partner there. How can the public help with this project? Because it is a solution. I hear that the bureaucracy around it is really complicated, but is there anything we can do to move it along? Because it seems getting sand in there would, it works. And there are areas actually where sand has moved naturally into areas that have been decimated by the crabs. And you can see the Spartina grass coming up through the sand, which is fantastic in these areas that have already been really demolished. So, question, can we do anything to help move that along?
So, I mean, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you right now. I will say that there are some challenges, but they're not insurmountable. So I think we're going to continue to look into ways that we can move some of this forward. I don't have, like I said, fortunately, I don't have a really good answer of how the public could really get involved to move this forward at this point. I think I also want to be careful. We're in the very, very early stages of really kind of looking at this. So, I mean, it's not like I think we're ready to go out and dump metric tons of sand in West End Marsh and say that that's our solution. That's not what we're saying at all. So, it's early, but I think we have some promising information to work forward with.
Well, I encourage you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. We haven't heard from you yet.
No, and I don't feel like I'm also on the board of health. I don't want to talk about that. I remember that issue in after there was a big flood and that's the Breakwater. Yeah. And I'm wondering and that once they were going from I don't know.
The purple marsh crabs, the increase, it does not directly correlate with that, so it would be hard to say. It's more likely that it's mainly related to sea level rise. So that's the general.
Whether the proliferation of the marsh crab is anything other than not having do something about the salinity or the temperature. Marsh grass or some other thing that increases. Fully solve the problem.
I think we probably haven't seen changes to salinity with respect to climate change, but Jeff, do you have any insight on that question?
Still a lot but there's a lot of speculation that it's lack of predators.
Okay.
But I think that, I don't know that there's been a lot of study done to confirm that.
Okay.
Jeff, sorry, in other areas where they're just as prevalent and there are predators, like
They are still a problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there- so is there a correlation that they're studying between that, why they're growing so much where there are predators?
Yeah, which I don't have a good answer for that.
I mean, I think Chase's point about them being nocturnal and the shorebirds not really feeding at night is a. Gotta get the
Yeah,
shorebirds
there's a
on
lot
your
of
schedule.
Exactly. Turn them into night owls, literally. Haha. Alex, you want to go ahead?
Like, somebody just brought up about salinity, since I've had the farm. At this time, until next year, it'll be 36. The salinity.
Yeah.
Except after we have a rainstorm.
Yeah.
And then it goes down to 27, 26 parts per thousand. Getting 29 to 30. That storm here too. Sure, when it comes to that stuff, I've been following that because of the shellfish. Sometimes with shellfish, you get too much brackish, too much brackish water and
Yeah.
fresh water and salt water.
Yeah.
I've been following that long. I got 89.
Wow.
I got the record.
And it's been pretty stable.
South.
Thanks.
But nothing seems to be that much changing there. That thing goes.
Right.
I still like that idea about that control area. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it sounds like a wonderful thing. Just somehow I just hope something simple can come out of it, this guideline thing. There's always something, one thing I have learned too, I do tell you folks, like I say, I told you. Clownfish, codfish started disappearing in the 90s. Was on it, what happened was dogfish came back. Dogfish came back, they ended up eating the small codfish because they were starting to cut open biological surveys, and they found them eating codfish.
Yeah.
They'd say, oh, it's the dogfish. So,
Yeah.
There's stuff sometimes when we get involved in things, I would from the government, we're here to help.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a rough ride. And it's the same thing too with seals. seals when they became federally protected. I know there's a lot of seal numbers here. Seals came in, lost all our food. So there's sometimes, there's a predator for everything out there. It's just that somebody's gonna come across it and find it. I still think, I'd love to try to do control areas. Really, really would.
So Steve actually is doing some in the West End
Yes,
Marsh
which is
currently,
great.
which is
Thank you so much. And I wasn't aware of that. I'm glad you're doing that. But I think that, hopefully some positive results will come out of this, or maybe you never know, we might get the loony bird that might show up that loves those doggone things, and then,
And then we can train the plovers.
I think one just obvious thing I think is like you can do a controlled study, you can dump sand all over the mud, these crabs can move, and there's some grasses. So unless we plan to, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but unless we plan to cover all of the areas, including dumping sand on top of the existing lively seagrass, then what stops these crabs? Over 20 feet.
Also, like, I've always subscribed to the belief that, there's a ecosystem and a circle of life, and oftentimes human intervention is to remove ourselves out of that, and humans are apex predators. So, if this was an issue 200 years ago, get rid of the crabs. Same thing with the seals. And I mean, I'm not saying we should cull seals. I'm just saying that once we removed humans out of that, the seal population has grown unchecked, and it's affected many other things. So I think sometimes we're too cautious, and it has a knock-on negative effect.
And if we completely honor the ecosystem in the world, we take the whole break.
But if we honor the ecosystem, we'd be in the predatory system. So then we are.
Has anybody ever tried to eat a purple?
We did make broth out of them with the Center for Coastal Studies banquet a few years ago, and a green crunch.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, maybe market them, sell them.
Yeah.
They did that with
Turn them
all
into pet food.
Florida.
Right.
It's a basic, and now they
And
market it.
whoever was on whoever said, how can we help, like, I'm out there every day and we can take I mean, even to take photos of areas like time lapse, anything we could, I mean, simple things to at least monitor it.
Michael?
I concur with a lot of what I'm hearing. I think, talk to people. Speak to that. I kind of want to challenge the science. I'm hearing that the model doesn't fully represent what we have here. It's only going to affect 125 feet, but how long do they run that model? Long in a period of time, we've heard people say, it's going to do what it wants. It's going to move. 125 feet is going to become 150 feet over time, become 175 feet. Time and tide aren't going to wait. I'd like to challenge the model, hear a little more about that. When was that high flow rate? I kind of heard something about mid-tide. Did they talk about which wind direction? Did they talk about the astronomical highs versus the astronomical lows? Wind direction and speed, how is that going to affect the break in the breakwater? I feel like this really cool experiment, put a black dot and ask someone to describe a piece of paper. We're focused on this little itty bitty crab. I think we're forgetting everything else around us. I'd like to hear a little bit more about maybe who has that write up that we could look at and the time frame of this model. I think we might not fix the problem right today. This problem, once you open it, could be there for 50, 60 years, and that longevity of that problem could be lasting.
Larry, do you want to, oh, I'm sorry. Larry, did you want to reply to that, or?
The model doesn't take into account porosity of the breakwater. So we know that there's a same amount of water goes through the breakwater every day in both directions. As would, and putting in this break in it, not gonna really change the amount of water going back and forth. Reality is, velocity is probably gonna be a lot less because pressure behind the breakwater, because it's porous, it's not like a dam. It's going to be less, not more. And so it's going to affect that small area. The odds of it, coming out and digging out areas along that whole breakwater from where the break is, I think it's pretty small. The advantage of having predatory fish, and when I say predatory fish, I'm thinking fish that eat crabs, have access in there, at least you're gonna get something that will potentially help. It may not solve the problem, but it might slow it down. And it might also invite, a lot of problems that we have is overfishing. We overfish, we don't know what that means, but we definitely take out predators that those fish used to be. So, we don't know ecologically what this is going to do. And I think that's the whole point of having this. I don't think we should be going down these paths of, saying that challenging the science. Well, you can just look at the breakwater and it's just porous.
Could I have the?
You're not gonna change the water.
Yes, you will change your water.
Where's the water flow gonna change?
Water flow is gonna change by the pressure. It's like a nozzle.
The pressure's the same.
When you force it through a smaller hole like that, you're gonna invite more water coming through there, which is gonna create the scouring, which is gonna make more water coming out there.
I disagree.
Why don't we have-
Guess what, pal? I've been on the water all my freaking life and I've seen it.
All right, let's have Larry give us an explanation about how that model was actually reached, because I think that was the question that was originally asked, and I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, the model did include the permeability of the dike. It's just that it's not made to do that. So the hydraulic engineer had to make some changes to the model to reflect that. So it wasn't a perfect situation. But again, the reason we did that to start is to save money and get a general sense and help us with our phased decision making. So it's not the final answer, but it's suggesting that multiple openings probably won't be the solution. But if we do more modeling with a more appropriate model, we may find that that's not the case and that there's more of a reduction in the velocity. Can you guys see the Google Earth picture on my computer?
Yes.
I just wanted to also put in perspective, that line there is 125 feet. That little yellow line. And so I know you said there's recreational shellfishing next to the dike, but this is about the distance of the shellfish leases. So just to put in perspective, the 125 feet relative to the location, I think there's one here within about 800 feet.
Okay.
I'd also like to say that we didn't do this we didn't justify this based on the marsh crab. We just wanted to have increased connectivity because we have 300-400 acres of marsh here that aren't available as habitat. And in general, even if it weren't the marsh crabs, things get out of balance when you don't have the top predators there. And while I'm talking, I believe we talked about it in a previous meeting, but we have what's called the beneficial uses of dredged material. And I was just at a meeting on Monday talking about thin layer placement. And so I can check into the status of the Provincetown project. I don't think it needs dredging. But that's a possibility in the future that if you needed a bunch of sand, that the Corps of Engineers could help provide that. And just for the Park Service information, the state of Massachusetts is developing thin layer placement guidance and regulations. So that should be easier to do in the future.
And who pays for the sediment study? And if that's a couple hundred. Yeah.
Yeah.
But does it make sense to, I mean, I think I agree that the sediment study is important, and I think it will also maybe impact plants in just general, and it's good information to have, but so before we, make the jump to opening the break, does it make sense to have the sediment study? And in the meantime, we look at marsh crab mitigation factors anyways, and just see if that makes an impact on rebuilding the marsh, or at least stemming the speed of grass. And while we wait for that study to come back, and then that's gonna be impactful.
Yeah, this is news to town staff too. We just got this yesterday, so I think based on the feedback that we're getting today, we're going to want to figure out what the best next steps are. And it might be that we want to do a little bit more hydrological modeling to see if the sedimentation analysis makes sense. But if we do want to go in that direction, it would have to be another ask at town meeting.
Yeah.
But,
well,
yeah.
a couple of thousand. Lobster roll here, fine for taxes, it's not like everyone's gonna be.
Has anything like this project been done anywhere else in the United States?
Well, to me, this is like a fish passage project, right? We're just restoring connectivity. I'm sure we've done other projects like that. We've done dam removal projects. We've done fish ladder projects to give fish access to upstream habitat. In terms of salt marsh restoration, we've done lots and lots of projects where we're looking at, say, a road crossing, and we put in a culvert to provide tidal flooding to an area where the flooding was restricted. This project's a little different because it's connectivity for fish in a coastal area where we normally be doing a hydraulic restoration to restore a salt marsh. So it is a little bit different, but it's in some ways similar to other projects we've done.
Paul, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, Paul Benson again. I mean, I heard one person talking about sluicing and scouring and intense currents, another person talking about the currents are going to be the same as they are through the breakwater now. And I wanted to go back to one of the numbers you presented earlier, which is that the current conditions are the velocity at 6.7 feet per second coming through the breakwater. Presumably that's at mid tide.
Only at the low point in the breakwater.
Only at that point. But it's a mid tide, so it's at that point that it doesn't matter. And that the safe speed to swim in is 2.5 feet per second. So the current conditions are faster than probably we feel like they are because we swim at high tide. Is that what's going on there? The 6.7, like, one of the things that I think I understood those numbers to say is that the speed in the gap in the openings isn't going to be that different from the current speeds. And I think that people have had a different take on what is happening with that. So could you just go back to that?
Yeah, that opening is not very deep, so it's less of a duration. But you do have very high velocities. I think it was Michelle talking about swimming near there, that she feels those velocities even through the dike. So it's a thing for the town to be aware of.
Yeah, I think the current's a little spicy even at high.
So the 6.7 at the low point was measured at high tide, not at mid tide? Or like
Right, that wouldn't be at mid tide there.
So it's not changing number, the 6.7 number, that's high tide at the low point.
Yeah, it was 627 as a peak velocity through the existing depression. And then the model said 6.2, 6 to 6.2 feet per second with multiple openings.
At mid tide.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about when the tide, like, at what point in the tide is that peak velocity being reached? Because I think that's really the question in the room right now. It's not necessarily high tide, it's not necessarily mid tide.
And then the heights of each tide are different, so that plays a factor as
And
well.
you're also talking about it going through the breakwater over a rock. You're not talking about it going through a sediment that's moved, correct? You're talking about it over a solid multiple 100-pound piece of rock, correct?
So I'm not the hydraulic engineer, so forgive me if I get this a little bit off. But the major difference between the lines that reflect the marsh, what's that say, marsh observation, Provincetown, occur in the mid tide, right? So when the tide moves out a lot faster from the big open area that's not restricted, that means it's holding more water and increasing the head differential. The water on the inside is higher. So when the head is higher, the pressure is higher, and that means the velocity is higher. And that would happen not at the highest point of the tide because they're very close, but as the tide leaves, they start to separate, and then the velocity increases.
And the tide data that's used is based on an average over a period of time, correct? It's not one high tide that was observed. It's a variety or it's a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, he picked tides that would reflect the worst case conditions, and the tides are going to be they're pretty reliable, right? So you don't have to have every single condition to reflect what the typical situation is going to be.
Larry, question.
Sure.
Larry, Michaela asked the question, why did they put it in there? And my reading of history is they thought that the West End Marsh was going to fill in the harbor and this would stop it from happening. And so the question is, did it? And do those low spots, which I have lost at low and high tide, do those low spots indicate that it's beginning to fail? Essentially, is the West End Marsh migrating into the harbor despite the best efforts of the dike?
Well, it is built on sand, and it's got a footing under it. So, but in places, right, the sand moves a little bit, and so it can settle. And so we maintain our structures when they start to not perform their function. These two little depressions, I don't think are going to do anything for the functioning of the dike to protect Provincetown Harbor. So,
But does it?
it still serves its purpose.
Is it holding all that sand west of the dike from coming into the harbor?
Yeah, I mean, it would stop sand from moving in that direction, but it doesn't seem like there's just looking at the Google Earth, there's plenty of sand in that system that could make its way to the harbor, but we don't dredge the harbor very often, so we don't really have a sedimentation problem there.
It seems like if we need to put more sedimentation in there, then it's being pulled out of the marsh.
Can I ask a question for Mark?
I think just to respond to that, I think part of it, it's not just that the marsh may be subsiding, but it's that sea level's rising
So
too.
we need more sediment input in order to keep that elevation.
And also that where this damage is happening is near the street. Like it's predominantly in that little nook that's like nestled over by AWOL Hotel, probably out maybe 50 feet.
Mhm.
Other than that, if you go further out, there's not
Not as
so
much.
I don't know if that's like that. I think that should be considered too. It's like, why is it happening in this?
That area.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But my question for Mark, if it's okay, is you had spoken earlier about this being one of the best marshes on the Cape, which I agree with you. And I guess sort of my question is, because you have a lot more experience than I do, is that is true even with the breakwater, and that it's pretty well flushed out. And so do you think that having smaller openings would allow better flushing and more sediment to get, or maybe that's not something you can answer, but do you think that that would, without maybe making some of the more drastic changes that people are worried about?
You know, I think the primary reason why it's such a great salt marsh, because it was go to the other marshes, back of East Harbor. Drain those marshes. This marsh hasn't been. That's what makes it so extremely high value. Sediment, you know, I just have to say it's complicated and there is a process. You know, one of the things about viability of Wood and Bear Beach is the supply of sand around Grace Point. That's why that's. And, you know, if you look at the breakwater as well, it's not like there's a huge accumulation of sand west side of the breakwater that's waiting to go through into the harbor. I think it was rather misguided or overstated need for that for the breakwater in 14. I think that was, yeah, but you know, I can't say.
Yeah.
But, generally, I think that the supply of sand from Grace, flow of sand through the marsh is really important, especially as sea level. Chase said, let's take out the whole breakwater. And ecologically and hydrologically, that would be better.
That would fix the velocity issues for sure.
Yeah. But you know, we gotta find something practical because
There were a lot of structures that were installed coastally that have proven to not
That
have the
makes
effect
sense.
that they wished that they would
Yeah.
have on the system.
I guess sort of that's my concern with this, and, you know, again, like many people who have a lot more experience and a lot more knowledge have been doing studies, but, like Jeff said, sort of we're at the beginning of studying the purple marsh crab, and sort of, we've done light studies for this, but we haven't done the sediment study, or we haven't done, so sometimes I think that people have really good intentions and that might seem great in the moment and then has a negative knock-on effect. And so I just think in this, and again, I'm not for or against this, I just like would caution us to be prudent with it and maybe not make it ecological or economic drastic change. We're talking about people's livelihoods on the flats, if we're talking about, a lot of different things that we just do the studies, and in the meantime.
You go with mitigation, it's like a lot of these conversations about the sediment, opening it up, the engineering of it. But is there a conversation that happens with what keeps coming up? Is the mitigation? What is the next step? Do we wait for another annual meeting? Is there a series of meetings that could happen with the community in the park, or even within the community, to start to build an action plan, or at least continue a conversation, so we don't wait for this meeting again?
Well, I'll take a stab at that one. I think what is important, I've really appreciated everyone's turnout and the engagement of basically everyone in the room and your feedback. And I think we've gotten some information at this town staff level that we need to process and talk about with our partners, including the Army Corps and the Seashore, to see what really makes sense. We want to preserve the town's financial resources. Does it make, we've essentially have $120,000 to put towards this study. I think what we've learned from this initial review and from your comments and your questions is that we need to really take a close look at what makes the best sense. do we really, is there another step of hydrological analysis that makes sense here before we commit further funds? And also, I think we need to continue that conversation with the National Seashore. So I would say I don't really know yet what the public process is going to look like, but obviously we're not going to make decisions without getting input like this on a regular basis. So I don't know enough about it yet. Do you have any more information?
Sure.
Right, right. Absolutely, absolutely. Go ahead, Paul.
Kind of following up. When you talk about sand piling up on either side of the breakwater, where I actually feel like I see that happening is if you're looking way out on the left, sandbar, where you take your boat, where you see scorching grass, and if the sand is coming around from Race Point around Long Point, it is.
Mhm.
Is that where sand if sand wanted to be joining that system, marsh, is that where it's trying to go through the break? Like at the back end on the left? Or what, where you have to.
Yeah, I think no, I think what we know of sediment transport in the harbor is that is true. We do see it hook around Long Point. Our harbor is very, very deep. Not far off of Long Point. It drops to 90, 100 feet. But there is some carryover around the point in that direction towards the breakwater. Right.
And I think if you look at the depths, basic symmetry of harbor and the marsh is what it is. Not significantly the depths themselves.
Yeah.
The amount of sand there is close to the natural condition, I would say. As it is variance based on this.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Some studies to say where, if you look at the amount of sand that's in the West End Marsh and really nice. Or unlike.
Yeah.
There's not that much sand to move.
Yeah. And to follow on a point that Melissa made, we don't necessarily know what people were thinking back in 1914, nor did core projects that back then necessarily address the issues that they were intended to. But when you do look at the map of Provincetown around then, you see consistent breaks between Wood End and Herring Cove. And it might have been that this was designed to protect the harbor from westerly storms, more so than to keep sand from filling into the harbor. It might have been more of a protecting a deep water port, boats, vessels in a deep water port, as opposed to the harbor from filling in. And that's just my conjecture. So take that with a grain of salt.
Page by page in this. And in Provincetown Harbor, where everyone's talking about between Long Point and the breakwater, there was an island.
Yeah, House Point.
Yes, and so it's still kind of there because there's a wet haul out that the seals use now. It's right out there. There's a shallow spot.
Oh, it's in this house. Okay, thank you.
It's kind of interesting that maybe the dike is preventing sand from coming in as opposed to coming out
Right.
in the west.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Larry, is there a document from when they had a contract that says why it was going in? Because I hear a lot of, it was maybe this, okay.
Yeah, they were all mainly based on irrigation.
What I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Larry.
We did very, very short reports in the old days. I'm looking at one of them right now, and I was thinking I'll just send them to Tim and Melissa. I was looking them up the other day, and there's not a lot of details, but yeah. They don't provide a lot of reasoning.
What would be, the projected or desired timeline?
Tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah. Did you mean to finish the study as it was originally outlined?
talking this would start in a year and take, you know, a couple months to complete? Or are we saying that this would start, you know, next month and take, you know, I guess I just don't know any of that, so I was.
Get it. Yeah. Larry, can you maybe talk about what the timeline of the study as it's currently outlined would be? And then from there, I think we can make some ideas about town meeting timing for funding, and then we can talk about what an implementation project timeline might be.
Yeah, so obviously it's gonna depend on which direction different things take. But say we were to do like that moderate amount of hydraulic modeling, and that led to a conclusion that we should, you know, that one way or another, we're either gonna put an opening in, or we're not gonna put an opening in, just stop the report. That's just like a year to get that done.
Then, sorry, my follow-up question is, so this is an Army Corps, the Army Corps controls the site. Just that, we're all sitting around talking about what we want. But do we actually have any say, or do we just have a say for matching funds, or the Army Corps is trying to do what they want to do with their property, whether we want it or not, or whether we, or if they decide, if we say we want it and they decide they don't want to do it, do we have any say either way?
Right. So Larry, I don't know if you caught all that, but
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
I think the question
think so.
was,
Yeah, it's a partnership. We don't have any authority to put a hole in the dike without a non-federal sponsor agreeing that they want to do it. So the only way that we would do the project is with a non-federal cost sharing partner.
Larry, the follow-up question was, does a non-federal sponsor have to be a state or municipality? Can it be a private actor?
Project like this could be like a nonprofit that is like a national nonprofit, someone who could pay damages in the event of you know, lawsuit, basically.
No, it has to be non-federal. Yeah. I don't think the Center for Coastal Studies would have, it sounds to me like what they're saying is they need someone with deeper pockets than the Center for Coastal Studies. Yeah.
Well, that's my question.
Yes. Yeah. We're going to drive it. Yeah. Okay. The thought I didn't get to complete was that I forgot to ask everyone to sign in. So as we get these reports and information from the Army Corps of Engineers, if you'd like for us to keep you informed, it would be great if you could leave your name and email address. And obviously we will be continuing our next meeting. We will advertise in the same way, but if we do have your email address, that would be a great way for us to get in touch with you directly once further decisions are made and further meetings are scheduled. So on your way out, if you want to leave your name and email address, we'll add you to it and keep you in the loop that way. Yeah. Thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye, Larry.